Sarao, sir.
Honored for the liberal introduction that you have given about me. Professor Bhagavati Prakash Sharma ji, the Vice Chancellor of Gautam Buddha University, my dear friend Professor Vaidyanath Lab, Vice Chancellor of Navanalanda Mahavihara, Professor Most Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, Most Venerable Sang Sen ji, Venerable Dr. Thich Hom Yen, Venerable Dr. Medgoda Abetissa, Venerable Dr. Dhammapiya, my dear friend Professor Surinder Kumar Singh, Dean School of Buddhist Studies and Civilizations, Gautam Buddha University, and my dear friend Professor Vimlendra Kumar, Head of the Department Pali and Buddhist Studies, Banaras Hindu University, and the organizing secretaries and hosts, Professor Arvind Kumar Singh and Venerable Thich Tung Tak. I have named only those personalities who are listed in the inaugural speech. There are hundreds of other highly honorable members, scholars present here. I am grateful. So I'm not naming them because I have been given only 10 minutes to complete my speech. I am really grateful to all of you and especially the organizers of this conference who have given me this honor to make a keynote speech here. I have prepared a small, about 10-minute PPT presentation. So I will actually will be using my PPT speech. Could you, Bante ji, able the share screen? Can I share?
Yes, so of course, yes.
I would like to share my screen.
Okay, now I'll try to share the screen now.
Now, my is my screen showing now?
Dear Dharma comrades, greetings from
My screen, not this one.
the organizers, especially Dr. K.T.S and his team, for inviting me to give the keynote speech in this conference. I have converted my speech into a 15-minute presentation, and here goes this. Buddhist perspective on global well-being. Human problems are basically of two types. Natural, that is the universe will one day come to an end. It has its own life. But more than that is the problem that is man-made, basically that arise out of volitional and karma of humans, be it pollution or overpopulation or poverty or violence or even the Chinese COVID-19 plague, the man-made problems that basically we are going to talk about today. In today's globalizing world, it is basically seen as highly irresponsible and selfish. This kind of system is creating poverty, basically. That is, wealth is getting concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. As a result, you have rampant poverty on the one hand and extremely what you call is kind of shameless wealth and luxury that exists in the world. Apart from this, the globalizing system creates competition rather than cooperation amongst human beings. In other words, this kind of system is turning humans against humans and countries against countries. So the major obstacle to the well-being of humans in this world is poverty and unequal access to resources. The Buddha very beautifully mentions in the Aganya Sutta that it is the origin of private property, basically, and then the state that are primarily responsible for the kind of deprivation that we have in the world. And as long as deprivation exists in the world, poverty exists, it is very difficult to think in terms of peace and happiness. In fact, sannyas appears to be a rejection of family, private property, and state. Interestingly, Karl Marx and Engels, in that very famous book, Origin of Family, Private Property, and State, also say very strongly that it is these three institutions, family, private property, and state, that are the main culprits which have caused so much of poverty and deprivation. And in other words, from a Marxist perspective, state actually exists for the rich people. It helps the rich people. And in other words, state causes deprivation and poverty and injustice. And we as humans commit all kinds of atrocities on each other for the sake of me and my family. And so from Marxist perspective also, private property, accumulation of wealth are the main problems that humans face and are the major obstacle to well-being of humans. Just look at today's world where 90% of the resources of the world are owned by just 2% of the population of the world, which is also very insensitive. You see the kind of behavior that rich people who control the resources, the kind of behavior they indulge in. For the last 50 years or so, Meadows and Meadows, this couple, husband and wife, along with a team of about 50 research scientists, have been looking at all the variables and constants. Variables like population of the world will continue to increase for quite some time. Food production also possibly will increase with more scientific discoveries, etc. More pollution also will be created. Perhaps industrial production to some extent will increase. However, non-renewable resources will continue to get diminished, so on and so forth. So Meadows and Meadows say that if all these constants and variables are taken into consideration, and the world continues to act in the manner it is acting at present, then the world will definitely collapse within the 21st century. That is very serious indeed. And they propose, and interestingly, it's very similar to the perspective of Buddhism. And the proposal is that the world is very clearly moving into the wrong direction, that is, Agati Gaman. So the question arises, why do we take what we don't need and hence create deprivation, scarcity, and poverty? People buy things not because they need them. Most of the time they buy things because they want them. So today's consumer society is characterized by the belief that owning things is the primary means to happiness, and thus consumption is accepted as a way to self-development, self-realization, and self-fulfillment. So the profit-oriented economic system is no longer determined by the question, what is good for humans, but by the question, what is good for the growth of the system. So this kind of globalizing profit-oriented system works on the principle that egotism, selfishness, and greed are fundamental requirements for the functioning of the system, and that they will ultimately lead to harmony and peace. However, greed and peace preclude each other. So from Buddhist perspective, more production of material goods, their increased consumption and craving for them will not necessarily lead to happiness. Schumacher, in that famous book, Small is Beautiful, says that the hope that by the single-minded pursuit of wealth, without bothering our heads about spiritual and moral questions, we could establish peace on earth is unrealistic, unscientific, and irrational. That is, of course, first of all, we have to provide equal access to resources to all the citizens of the world, and then also need to put some kind of spiritual, moral value system in place which can maintain that kind of access, and also teach certain values to humans, which I'll come to later. And so from Buddhist perspective, an entirely new system of thought that is focused on people instead of goods is needed. As Schumacher says, production by the masses rather than mass production needs to be put in place. There is a need to seriously examine not only our attitude, therefore, and lifestyles, but also our policies that govern the use of renewable and non-renewable resources, science and technology, and the scale and direction of industrialization. So the major flaw in today's globalizing consumer system is that it is widening the gap between the rich and the poor. As, for example, the 1992 report of UN Human Development says that top 1 billion people of the world hold 83% of the wealth of the world. And the bottom 1 billion people have only 1.4% wealth of the world. So if this kind of system continues to get perpetuated, it is virtually impossible to think of peace and well-being in this world. So as Elgin said, a sort of moral system. From Buddhist perspective, what kind of moral system needs to be put in place if we can think in terms of creating peace and happiness in the world? One is voluntary simplicity or poverty. That is, we all must learn to live as simple as possible, as poor as possible. That is, reducing our desires, as few needs, apicchata, and being satisfied with as little as possible. And so therefore we need to be frugal in terms of consumption, and we must avoid wastefulness. As the Buddha says regarding this person, this Galatana Dumbar Khadika, this person keeps shaking a fig tree and all the fruit fall down, and he just needs 4 or 5 fruit, eats them and goes away. And the Buddha raises this question as to why this person had to cause so much harm and destruction, waste so many fruit, when he just needed only 4 or 5. So what we need to do is, we need to learn that even when we do not need a certain material good, it must not be wasted. And also Buddhist attitude in terms of karuna, metta, dan, tyag, empathy for others, restraint, sharing your surplus wealth or goods. It is this kind of values also that need to be ingrained into the system. And so the goal of the government or the system must be first to provide equal access to all the citizens, to the development, production of material goods to meet the basic needs of the people. When this kind of thing is being done, our policymakers politicians and bureaucrats also have to put a sort of value system in place. We need to sensitize our citizens to this kind of value system, these values, so that they follow these values and avoid doing the opposite. And what is the time when citizens can be sensitized to this kind of value system? That some well-documented research shows that the best time to teach these kind of values is to the time when a person is very young, that is at the school level. So we, from Buddhist perspective, perhaps it's very important that we ingrain this kind of value system in the school education that we offer to our young boys and girls, the future citizens of the world. And so, as Eric Fromm has said, we instead of having mode of existence, we need to replace it with a mode of being mode of existence. And so, as I said, there is an urgent need to sensitize people to that kind of value system that I was talking about. And Buddhist doctrine of K.T.S. also supports this kind of thinking, and also the doctrine of karma and rebirth. That is, that every living being in this world is connected to every other living being in the world. That is, that a person whom I may be causing harm, thinking that this person is not related to me, is false thinking. Because through millions and millions of births and rebirths, it is quite possible that the person that I am causing harm to is maybe my grandfather, or maybe in the future this person will be my grandchild. And so the doctrine of karma, rebirth, and K.T.S. also sort of hint at the notion that we must consider ourselves as integral part of this entire samsara, and so causing any harm to anybody or anything will ultimately come to us. To conclude, in the words of Elgin, we must live with a reasonable degree of equity, that is fairness, for it is unrealistic to think that in a communication-rich world, 1 billion or more persons will accept living in absolute poverty, while another billion live in conspicuous access.